I never thought the most important piece of clothing in my life would be a perfectly tailored suit, a piece of fabric that carried the weight of 2 men, 3 generations, and a lie so deep it threatened to tear my entire family apart. I'm talking about the uniform, not a military uniform, but the crisp, bespoke suit jacket my father always wore to the most formal events, the one he claimed was custom-made for him when he was appointed to the City Council. The shocking part, I found the original tailor's mark, a tiny, almost invisible stitch inside the cuff, and the name wasn't my father's. It was my grandfather's, a man I had been told died penniless and disgraced 20 years before I was born. My question to you is, knowing what that suit represented to my father's entire identity and the fragile peace in our family, was I wrong to chase the truth about the name I found in the lining, even if it meant destroying the perfect picture of our family history? Tell me if you would have done the same thing. To really understand why a suit could be the catalyst for such a massive upheaval, I have to take you back to the very beginning, to the legends my father, Arthur, built around his own life, and by extension mine. Our family, the Hayes family, was always presented as a classic American success story, forged from pure grit and determination. The central figure in this narrative was, of course, my father. He was a pillar of the community, a self-made man who started with nothing literally, he always emphasized that, and worked his way up to City Councilman, a position he held with almost religious devotion. Everything he owned, every accolade he achieved, he attributed to his own sweat and blood. The uniform, as we called it, was his personal symbol of this triumph. It was a midnight blue, double-breasted jacket, always immaculate, and it only came out for the most significant public appearances, swearing, in ceremonies, major charity galas, and the annual mayor's dinner. He would tell me stories about how he saved up every penny to have it made, selecting the fabric himself, ensuring it was a garment worthy of the office. He'd say, "This, my son, is the uniform of a man who rose above his circumstances. Remember that. The clothes you wear reflect the respect you command." The circumstances he rose above were always framed by the dramatic, tragic story of his own father, my grandfather, Elias Hayes. My knowledge of Elias was limited to a few yellowed photographs and my father's somber, rehearsed narrative. According to my father, Elias was a charming but deeply flawed man, a dreamer, a gambler, and ultimately a failure. He had a brief, promising career in textiles, but poor investments and a crippling addiction to high-stakes poker led him to lose everything: the family home, the business, and my grandmother's savings. He was said to have disappeared one night when my father was a young teenager, leaving behind a note and a mountain of debt, later confirmed to have died alone in a small, distant city, his body unclaimed for weeks. This narrative served a dual purpose. It made my father's success that much more heroic, the son triumphing where the father failed, and it completely erased Elias from any position of honor in our family history. My father ensured that my childhood was filled with the promise of stability, a direct counterpoint to his own chaotic upbringing. My life was good, safe, and structured. I was an only child, and my father's entire expectation for me was to continue the legacy of respectability he had established. I graduated top of my class, went to a prestigious university, and was preparing to enter law school, following the path he had laid out. The uniform, the jacket, remained a silent, powerful presence. It lived in a special cedar closet, protected by a canvas garment bag, and only my father was allowed to touch it. One afternoon, about 3 months ago, everything changed. My father had left for an emergency meeting, and in his haste, he had simply tossed the uniform over the back of an antique chair. It was the first time I had ever seen it completely unattended. I walked past it, planning to just hang it properly, when I noticed a tiny, loose thread near the left cuff. As a meticulous person, I reached out to snip it, and my fingers brushed against the inside lining. That's when I felt it, a subtle, rough patch where the smooth silk lining had been slightly disturbed. Curiosity, a feeling my father had often warned me against, took over. I carefully turned the cuff inside out, and there, in a tiny, almost invisible cross stitch that only a master tailor would use, was a set of initials, E. H, followed by a date, 1968. My father's initials were A. H, and he wasn't even born in 1968. A cold, heavy certainty settled over me. This was my grandfather's suit. The one my father claimed was the monument to his own self-made success. The entire legend was a fabrication, and not just a small fib, but a lie woven into the very fabric of his public and personal life. I carefully restitched the tiny area, replacing the silk lining exactly as it was, and hung the jacket back in its closet, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The date, 1968, suggested the suit was nearly 50 years old, made when my grandfather would have been in his prime, before the alleged downfall. It meant that at the very least, my father had inherited a garment of significant quality and history, and had deliberately chosen to erase its true origin and claim it as his own creation. The act of wearing it wasn't a celebration of rising above his circumstances. It was an act of inhabiting a stolen identity, a claim of legacy that belonged to the man he had publicly disgraced. I became obsessed. I couldn't confront my father directly. His reaction would be explosive, defensive, and would immediately shut down any chance of getting the real truth. So I started my own secret investigation, focusing on the two main pieces of information I had: the initials E. H and the date 1968. I started with old city directories, looking for tailor shops that might have been operating in that era and would use such a discrete mark. I spent weeks cross-referencing names and locations, using the university library's archives. It was like living a double life studying constitutional law by day, playing a private detective by night. Finally, I found it, a small, almost forgotten entry for Sal's bespoke menswear, a name that appeared in the city's business records up until the early 70s. The description mentioned their specialty was discreet, personalized tailoring for the city's elite. The address was long since an office building, but the name was a lead. My next step was terrifying. I had to find a living connection to that tailor shop. I decided to use my father's political connections without his knowledge. I told him I was doing a research project on historical city planning, and I needed to interview long-time residents of the neighborhood where the shop was located. I spoke to elderly neighbors, historians, anyone who remembered the area. Eventually, I found an old man who had run a barber shop across the street from Sal's. He remembered Sal vividly. He told me that Sal was an old, school craftsman who kept immaculate records in case of warranty or alterations. He even gave me a name, Sal's grandson, who, he thought, had taken over the family business but moved it across the state. This was it, the thread that could unravel the whole tapestry. I drove 4 hours to the city where the grandson, Marco, now had his shop. I walked in, and the smell of fine wool and leather hit me, the exact, distinctive scent that permeated my father's uniform closet. I told Marco a carefully crafted story about a beloved family heirloom suit that had been damaged in a fire, and I was trying to trace the original tailor for a full restoration. I described the midnight blue fabric, the double-breasted cut, and, most importantly, the almost invisible E. H mark with the 1968 date, Marco's eyes lit up. He went to a dusty, fireproof safe in the back, pulled out a massive ledger bound in worn leather, and flipped through the pages. The ledger was magnificent, Han, written in beautiful script. He stopped on the page for 1968. There it was. Client, Elias Hayes. Item, formal City Council suit. Notes, initialed per client's request. Paid in full. But the notes didn't stop there. Underneath the entry, there was a handwritten addendum in a different ink and a slightly shakier hand, dated 1971. Alteration, tailored for a H. son, paid by Elias Hayes, marked as gift for successful graduation from college. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The suit was a gift. My grandfather, the supposed disgraced failure, hadn't abandoned his son and disappeared without a trace. He had paid for his son's suit, tailored for his college graduation in 1971, years after the official family story claimed he had died penniless. It was a gesture of love, a final act of support, perhaps even a reconciliation. The suit wasn't a symbol of my father's self-made status. It was a testament to his father's enduring care. Why did he lie? Why did he build an entire persona based on the public shaming and private erasure of the man who, in the end, still loved him enough to give him this priceless gift? The lie was twofold. Elias didn't abandon him, and the uniform was not my father's triumph, but his inheritance. So that's the situation I was in. I had the ledger entry, the physical proof, the real story of the uniform, and the terrible knowledge that my father had lived a monumental 30-year lie that painted his own father as a villain to make himself look like a hero. I was standing there, holding the key to unlocking the entire emotional architecture of our family. I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have kept the secret to preserve the legacy, or would you have risked everything for the truth, for the honor of a man you never even met? Let me know. I drove back home, the ledger entry, which Marco had allowed me to photograph, burned into my memory. When I got back, I didn't rush in. I waited. The annual mayor's dinner was 2 weeks away, the single most important event on my father's social calendar, and the one time the uniform was guaranteed to make an appearance. I knew I couldn't just throw the evidence in his face. It would be a messy, destructive confrontation that would end with him denying everything and me being cut out of his life. I needed a setting, a moment, where he would have no choice but to face the weight of the legacy he had buried. The night of the mayor's dinner arrived. My father was, predictably, resplendent in the uniform, radiating power and respect. Before they left, he stood in the foyer, adjusting his tie, and my mother was fussing over him. "Arthur, you look so distinguished," she said. "That suit truly is a councilman's uniform." My father beamed, catching my eye. "It is," he said. "It's a reminder that anything is possible when you work for it, right, son?" That was my moment. "Absolutely, Dad," I said, walking closer, my voice calm but firm. "It truly is a legacy piece. It's amazing it's held up so well since 1968. The smile froze on his face. My mother looked at me, confused. 1968. "Arthur, you said you had that custom made when you were appointed 10 years ago." My father's eyes, usually warm and confident, became two cold, hard points focused entirely on me. "What are you talking about, son? Are you feeling all right?" I walked past him to the foyer table, where I had placed a simple, hand-typed note. It wasn't a full confrontation. It was a calculated shot across the bow. "I just mean, it's amazing how a suit can carry a man's whole story. It's beautiful work, the kind of tailoring only someone like Sal could do." I leaned in, keeping my voice low so only he could hear. The kind of work he did for Elias Hayes in '68, the year he paid for his son A.H.'s graduation suit. A real legacy, wouldn't you say, Dad? His color drained completely. It was as if I had punched him in the chest. He didn't speak. He just stared at me, his face a mask of absolute terror and betrayal. He grabbed the note I had placed on the table. It only had the address of Marco's shop and a few dates written on it, and crushed it in his fist. My mother, sensing the seismic shift in the air, put a tentative hand on his arm. "Arthur, what's going on?" My father, however, didn't answer her. He looked at me, his eyes full of decades of fear. "We will talk when I get back," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage he was barely containing. He looked at the suit, the source of his pride and his shame, gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, and walked out the door with my mother trailing him, utterly bewildered. He wore the suit to the dinner, but the power, the confidence was gone. He came back hours later, long after my mother had gone to bed, exhausted from the strained evening. He was still wearing the uniform, but it looked heavy on him, like a shroud. He walked into the living room where I was waiting, the tension so thick I could practically taste it. He didn't yell. He just looked at me with an expression of profound sadness. "How much do you know?" he asked, his voice low and defeated. I didn't need to show him the photo of the ledger. He knew I had the proof. I simply said, "I know Grandpa Elias didn't abandon you. I know the suit was his gift for your college graduation in '71, and that he paid for it. I know he loved you. I know you lied about everything to become the man you are today." He slumped onto the sofa, the crisp lines of the uniform jacket crumpling under the weight of his truth. And he told me the rest of the story. Elias, my grandfather, wasn't a complete failure. He was a man with a gambling problem who fell in with bad people. He lost a lot, yes, but he wasn't a total deadbeat. In 1968, he was still solvent enough to buy the uniform. The suit, because he had political ambitions, too. He wanted to run for council, just like his son eventually did. But the gambling debts got worse. He knew he couldn't run. His past would be exposed. The night he disappeared, he didn't run from his family. He ran from the loan sharks, not wanting to put his wife and son in danger. He sold everything he had left, which was barely anything, and he sent money back intermittently, secretly, through a trusted friend, just enough to keep my grandmother afloat and to pay for my father's college. The suit was commissioned in '68 for his own political dreams, but when my father graduated in '71, Elias knew he would never get to wear it. He arranged through Sal to have it altered for my father as a last grand gesture, a piece of his own broken dream to give to his son's future. He died not long after in that distant city from a heart attack, finally free from the debt collectors, but still believing my father resented him. My father confessed that when he got the suit, he was a furious, broken young man. He was bitter that Elias hadn't been there for him, and he was ashamed of the family name. When he rose to prominence, the story of the disgraced father was the perfect counterpoint to his heroic narrative. He claimed the suit was his own purchase, his own monument, because he couldn't bear the thought of admitting that the one truly good thing he had inherited came from the man he had decided to publicly despise. The uniform became his shield, his trophy, and his greatest secret. He had dishonored a good man's memory to build a better life for himself and for us. The aftermath was painful and slow. I didn't tell my mother the full extent of the lie immediately. I let my father tell her, which he did, tearing down the heroic facade he had spent decades building. It was devastating for her, not the fact of the grandfather's life, but the depth of her husband's deceit. He eventually had to resign from the city council, not over the uniform, but over the stress and the need to step away and repair the damage in his own home. He began to speak of Elias, not as the ghost of a failure, but as a man who made mistakes, but who ultimately loved his son. I took the uniform to Marco's shop and had the lining removed, carefully stitching the original E.H. 1968 mark onto a simple, framed velvet cushion. I kept the jacket, no longer a symbol of a lie, but a memorial to the complicated love between a father and a son. My father and I have a long road ahead, but the truth, as brutal as it was, finally cleared the air. He is still my father, but now he is just Arthur, a flawed man, not a perfect hero. And Elias, my grandfather, finally got his long-overdue honor, represented not by a perfect suit, but by a simple, truthful tailor's mark. Like this video, if you were on my side in this search for the truth. Subscribe for more stories like this, where the most ordinary objects hold the most extraordinary secrets. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Did my father do the right thing by finally coming clean? And what does true family legacy really mean? I'll see you all in the next story.